On December 7, 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy launched a devastating surprise attack on the United States naval base at Pearl Harbor. In just a few hours, thousands of Americans were killed, and much of the Pacific Fleet was crippled in an operation that, tactically, was a masterpiece. However, history reveals a deeper narrative. Pearl Harbor was not the end, but the birth of an unshakable American resolve. While the attack destroyed battleships, it failed to hit the aircraft carriers that were out at sea, the very vessels that would become the backbone of our heroic counteroffensive. Furthermore, by ignoring the base's vital infrastructure, Japan allowed the U.S. Navy to rise again with a speed the world never thought possible. Tokyo's greatest mistake, however, was underestimating the spirit of a united people. The smoke over Pearl Harbor did more than silence isolationists. It ignited a flame of patriotic pride and an indomitable will to win that united every citizen from coast to coast in an unprecedented war effort. As Admiral Yamamoto himself feared, Japan did not just destroy ships. They awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with a terrible and glorious resolve to fight until the final victory.
Just before dawn, on Sunday, December 7th, 1941, the sky above Hawaii was clear. The air was warm, tropical.
Right.
You have to try and imagine the scene. The waters of Pearl Harbor, completely calm, reflecting that early morning light.
That's the picture of tranquility.
Exactly. And on board the dozens of ships moored along what they called Battleship Row, the routine was just peaceful.
Yeah, mess halls were serving breakfast.
Radios were playing soft Sunday music, and the U.S. flags, they were still neatly folded, just waiting to be hoisted at 8 a.m.
It just felt like any other Sunday morning.
For the thousands of sailors and servicemen stationed there, it was so far removed from the grinding, terrifying wars that were already consuming Europe and Asia.
Oh, it wasn't just distant. It felt impossible. I mean, the United States was officially neutral. We were watching all this chaos unfold from a safe distance.
We were comfortable.
We were comfortable, relatively safe, and, still clinging to this powerful century-old idea that the Pacific Ocean was just. It was wide enough and deep enough to keep all that conflict far away from our shores.
But history, as we now know, had already moved past that old geography.
It had.
That morning, that distance, it disappeared forever. So today, we're diving into your sources to really unpack the core context, the critical events, and the lasting global implications of the attack on Pearl Harbor.
This is the single morning that pulled America fully and irreversibly into the Second World War.
It was a turning point. It's where neutrality died and total war began for the United States.
And our mission here is to synthesize these materials to focus specifically on the intense desperation that drove Japan to gamble everything.
And the strategic miscalculations on both sides, right?
On both sides, absolutely. And some of the surprising tactical details that immediately shaped the rest of the 20th century. We really want to give you the shortcut to understanding why this single devastating surprise attack actually failed to achieve its ultimate goal.
And to really understand the attack, we first have to understand the world that was already, as you put it, breaking apart in the late 1930s. We have to go beyond that simple narrative of Japan attacked us and look at the existential pressure cooker they were in.
That's the key.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So the world in 1941 was already profoundly fractured. I mean, the fighting was global, and it's crucial we establish the scale of this before America even gets involved.
Right. This wasn't a world at peace.
Not at all. Nazi Germany had invaded Poland back in 1939, which ignited the war in Europe. By 41, Britain was essentially fighting alone, desperately being supplied by the U.S.
And in the East?
In the East, Japan had been engaged in this relentless, aggressive expansionism across Asia since at least 1937. They were locked in a brutal, very costly war with China, and they were occupying these vast, resource-rich territories.
And the United States was trying to walk this very difficult and frankly kind of contradictory tightrope.
Oh, absolutely.
Officially, we're neutral. We're governed by these isolationist policies that argued, we shouldn't get involved in foreign wars. But in practice,
we were deeply involved.
Our factories were supplying the Allies. The whole Lend-Lease system was funneling ships, planes, ammo to Britain. And maybe more critically in the Pacific, we were already using economic pressure as a weapon against Japan.
Trying to halt their expansion.
Exactly. Trying to stop them from moving into French Indochina and the Dutch East Indies.
And this economic reality, This is the critical context for Japan's decision. We have to understand that their newly expanded empire, for all its military victories, was built on an incredibly fragile foundation.
Logistically fragile.
Totally. They were winning land, occupying territory, but their entire industrial base, their whole military infrastructure, it relied almost entirely on imported raw materials.
And we're talking about the absolute essentials.
The essentials: rubber, iron ore, scrap metal, and the big one, the most critical of all, oil.
And when you look at those numbers, those resource dependencies, you really see the vulnerability.
You do.
Japan was producing some of its own oil, but it was minuscule compared to what their industry and their military needed. Our sources confirm that in 1941, over 90% of Japan's petroleum supply came from one place.
The United States.
The United States.
Oh.
They didn't just rely on us for oil. They relied on us for the very fuel that powered their entire war machine, their whole economy.
So when America made that decisive, calculated move in July of 1941, it wasn't diplomacy. It was an act of economic strangulation.
That's a good way to put it.
The U.S. government imposed comprehensive economic sanctions. They froze all Japanese assets in the United States.
And that action immediately cut off the flow of scrap metal, steel, and most importantly,
the oil. The critical oil embargo. This wasn't some political warning or a diplomatic slap on the wrist. This was an ultimatum delivered through the ledger book. It was designed to force a total change in Japanese policy.
I find that so fascinating. We often discuss the attack as this surprise military action, when really it was the culmination of an escalating economic war.
It absolutely was.
That embargo meant that Japan's military was, quite literally, running on borrowed time.
Absolutely. The stark reality facing Japan's leadership was that without access to these resources, especially oil, their military reserves would be gone in a matter of months.
How long did they think they had?
Estimates ran from 6 to maybe 18 months, depending on how they used it. They were staring at a ticking clock. Their fleet would be unable to move. Their planes would be grounded.
So diplomacy was still happening.
Diplomacy continued, but it was hollow. It was pointless. The U.S. demanded that Japan withdraw from China and all the occupied territories, which Tokyo.
No.
They viewed that as a total surrender, an unacceptable humiliation.
So the stakes were just. They were far higher than we usually realize. The choice wasn't simply between war and peace.
No.
It was between immediate, humiliating capitulation, retreating from years of bloody conquest, or launching a desperate military strike to secure the oil and rubber fields of Southeast Asia before their own supplies just ran out.
And retreat was never an option for the dominant military faction in Tokyo. It just wasn't going to happen. They were locked into this ideology of expansion. They believed that withdrawing would destroy the nation's honor, its long-term security.
And this necessity, this desperation, led directly to Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto.
And his bold, deeply cynical, and incredibly dangerous idea.
Now, Yamamoto, who was in command of the Japanese combined fleet, he wasn't naive about the balance of power, was he?
Not at all. He had studied in the U.S., he had been a naval attaché in Washington, he knew American industrial capacity intimately, and he understood better than a lot of his peers that Japan could not possibly win a long, grinding war of attrition against the sheer scale of American factory production.
And that realization is what makes his plan so critical to understand.
That is the key strategic insight. Yamamoto didn't plan Pearl Harbor to win the war outright.
He knew that was impossible.
He knew it was impossible. The whole premise was, if war with the United States is unavoidable, which the oil embargo made almost certain, then the U.S. Pacific Fleet had to be neutralized immediately and decisively.
It was a gamble of staggering proportions.
Huge.
The sudden, devastating blow against the main concentration of American naval power at Pearl Harbor. It was designed to do one thing, and one thing only.
Buy time.
Buy time.
Specifically, he hoped to sink the U.S. fleet and then use the resulting 6 to 12 months of American paralysis to just consolidate Japan's gains, take over those resource-rich areas like the Dutch East Indies.
So he was gambling that the shock would be so massive it would inflict such psychological and physical pain.
That the United States, which he viewed as deeply isolationist and soft, reluctant to enter the conflict, would be forced to negotiate.
Negotiate terms favorable to Japan, allowing them to keep their new empire.
Exactly. He was trying to change the whole calculus by inflicting pain so rapidly and so deeply that America would just hesitate before committing to years of bloody conflict.
The audacity of that plan is just breathtaking. And the scale of that risk required planning of unimaginable precision.
It did.
Which brings us to the surprising tactics they had to invent to even make the attack possible.
So, to execute an operation like this, so high stakes, so long distance, the planning had to be done in absolute secrecy, and the dedication of the Japanese military was truly remarkable.
They were basically planning a logistical marvel.
They were, crossing thousands of miles of the wildest part of the Pacific with a massive fleet, all while maintaining complete radio silence to avoid being detected.
And the most incredible part of that preparation, for me, was the specific technical problem they had to solve. It was a problem related to Pearl Harbor itself.
Right.
They didn't just decide to attack, they had to engineer a solution to the harbor's own geography.
Exactly. Pearl Harbor is, famously, a relatively shallow body of water. Sources indicate the depth where the battleships were moored was only about 12 meters, or what's that, 40 feet?
Which doesn't sound like much for these massive ships.
It's not. And normal naval torpedoes, when you drop them from a plane, they plunge deep, sometimes 50, even 100 feet down before they level out and travel towards their target.
So in Pearl Harbor, any conventional torpedo drop would have just
Buried itself in the mud.
useless.
Completely useless. It would have just been a dud on the harbor floor.
That's the kind of technical constraint that really should have made the target impossible. Or at least made a torpedo attack impossible.
It should have, but they overcame it. The innovation here was ingenious, but also quite simple in a way. They developed modified torpedoes specifically for this one location.
They didn't just train differently, they built new weapons.
Bespoke weapons. They took their standard Type 91 aerial torpedo and added these large auxiliary wooden fins to the tail.
Wooden fins. That sounds almost improvised.
It sounds improvised, but it was highly effective.
Yeah.
These wooden fins acted like anti-plunge stabilizers. So when the torpedo hit the water, the fins stopped it from diving too deep before the engines could take over.
So it allowed the torpedo to run true in shallow water.
Exactly. And they also introduced another key detail, a breakaway wooden box rudder. This specialized gear helped the torpedo maintain its course even after skimming that shallow water, which often destabilized conventional weapons.
Wow.
And then the pilots had to train for it relentlessly, perfecting these low-altitude torpedo attacks, skimming just above the surface to make sure these new torpedoes worked.
So they created custom munitions just for this one attack. I mean, that level of technical adaptation, it just speaks volumes about how thorough their preparation was.
And that required a massive commitment of resources. The preparation involved assembling the Kanobutai, the first air fleet,
Which was huge.
an unprecedented strike force at the time. 6 aircraft carriers, carrying 423 aircraft. It was the largest concentration of carrier power the world had ever seen.
Which is ironic, isn't it?
How so?
They were demonstrating a radical understanding that the future of naval power was in air power, which they were using to go sink battleships.
That's a fantastic point. They were using the weapon of the future to destroy the weapon of the past.
And keeping that force hidden while crossing thousands of miles of open ocean. That was a feat in itself.
A huge feat. The fleet set sail in late November 1941, departing from the remote Kuril Islands north of Japan. They took a northern route, which was generally stormier, less traveled.
And under strict radio silence.
So strict that if any ship had engine trouble, the commander's instruction was to just leave it behind. Secrecy was more important than a single ship.
So you contrast that quiet, calculated, incredibly disciplined approach with the atmosphere in Hawaii.
And the contrast is, it's stark. American complacency was rampant, and it was driven by geography and a fundamental misreading of the Japanese mindset.
American commanders just did not expect an attack on Pearl Harbor. Why? I mean, there were several really entrenched assumptions, right?
Several. First, it was considered too distant from Japan's bases for a large-scale, sustained operation.
Second, as we just discussed, the water depth itself was believed to be a natural defense against torpedoes.
Right. They thought it was impossible. And third, the military command in Hawaii was far more worried about internal sabotage from local Japanese residents than they were about a direct naval attack from the sky.
Which brings us to the profound tragedy, the intelligence failures.
Because the pieces of information were definitely there, warnings existed, intelligence signals, specifically those intercepted by the highly effective U.S. code-breaking operation called MAGIC, they indicated that war was imminent.
The MAGIC was breaking Japan's diplomatic codes.
Yes, and it was clear that Japan was focused on striking the U.S. fleet.
But the system just failed to connect the dots. The MAGIC intercepts gave general warnings about fleet movements and diplomatic deadlines, but they never explicitly said Pearl Harbor.
No, they didn't. And because the prevailing military assumption was that an attack would probably target the Philippines or Southeast Asia, any information that might have suggested a direct strike on Hawaii was just
Dismissed.
or omitted.
Interpreted.
You see this confirmation bias at work even on the morning of the attack. At 6:45 a.m., the USS Ward sinks a small Japanese midget submarine trying to get into the harbor.
A clear act of hostility.
Undeniable act of war right there. That report was relayed, but it took critical time to process up the chain of command, and it was ultimately just dismissed as an isolated incident.
And then, even more tragically, you have the radar.
The radar, a brand new technology at the time. It detected the first wave of incoming Japanese planes at 7:02 a.m. at a station on the northern shore of Oahu.
A huge blip on the screen.
Massive. But the soldiers who reported it were dismissed by the duty officer. He just assumed it was a flight of American B-17 bombers that were expected to arrive from the mainland that morning.
A catastrophic assumption.
So you have all these pieces of information. They're scattered, they're unconnected. The threat assessment was clouded by these entrenched beliefs. The idea that Pearl Harbor was too safe, too distant, and the focus on sabotage rather than an aerial attack.
And all of that complacency, it allowed that unprecedented strike force to arrive, completely unannounced, right above the unsuspecting harbor on a quiet Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And then the illusion of peace it collapses. Approximately 7:48 a.m. local time on December 7th, that's the moment the first wave of 183 Japanese aircraft appears over Oahu.
And the initial confusion was profound. The sensory experience must have been overwhelming.
I can't even imagine.
Survivors recall the noise, the roar of these low-flying aircraft, then that terrifying whine of the dive bombers, and then just the colossal sound of detonations.
And because so many sailors were just doing routine Sunday things, the initial realization that these weren't our planes.
That these weren't training exercises.
It must have been instantaneous and absolute the second the first bomb started falling on the airfields.
The attack was sudden, it was violent, and it was executed with a horrifying military precision. The planes swept across the harbor using those low-altitude techniques they'd perfected.
And their primary target was clear.
The 8 battleships, lined up along Battleship Row on the eastern side of Ford Island. They were easy, stationary targets, moored side by side. The very symbols of American naval power that Japan wanted to neutralize.
Within minutes, explosions are just tearing through the hulls, massive fires erupting across the decks. The calm harbor turns into this scene of industrial devastation.
The concentration of damage was intentional. That first wave focused primarily on armor-piercing bombs aimed at the battleships, and of course those specially modified torpedoes, ensuring maximum initial damage.
Well, we have to dedicate some time to the catastrophe of the USS Arizona. It's become the defining tragedy of that morning.
It really has. The Arizona was moored inboard alongside a repair ship, the Vestal.
And around 8:06 a.m., so about 18 minutes into the attack.
The Arizona suffers a direct hit from an armor-piercing bomb. Dropped from high altitude, it penetrates multiple decks and detonates near the forward ammunition magazines.
Where they stored hundreds of tons of powder and shells.
Exactly. The resulting explosion was colossal. It wasn't just a fire, it was a detonation that effectively tore the front half of the battleship apart.
The force of it. They say it lifted the 1,000-foot ship slightly out of the water before it just collapsed back down.
The ship immediately erupted in flames and sank so rapidly, it became a tomb for more than 11,177 crewmen and officers.
It happened so fast, many of them never even had a chance to realize they were under attack, let alone try to escape.
It was the single greatest loss of life from a single incident in the entire history of the U.S. Navy.
And today, the wreck of the Arizona is still there, right where it fell, preserved as a national memorial.
And that haunting detail, the oil. Visitors still see it. Oil continues to rise slowly from the sunken hull. They sometimes call it the tears of the Arizona. It perpetually marks the lives that were lost there.
That image, the oil perpetually rising, it really does capture the permanence of that day, doesn't it?
It does. It crystallizes the sense that the history there is still living, still sort of leaking out even after all this time.
But the devastation wasn't limited to the Arizona. The fate of the USS Oklahoma is its own unique horror.
It is. The Oklahoma was hit by a devastating sequence of torpedoes very early in the attack. It was an older, slower vessel, and it quickly took on a severe list.
They tried to seize it.
Sailors struggled to counterflood to try and keep it upright, but the damage was just too severe. After taking 5 torpedo hits, the ship capsized. It rolled completely over, trapping hundreds of men inside its hull.
Many drowned immediately.
But others found themselves in these tiny, dark air pockets deep inside the submerged compartments.
And the human drama that followed. It's just agonizing to think about.
The rescue efforts were immediate, they were heroic, and they were desperate. We know from the sources that men survived for hours, even days, in those air pockets. And they communicated their survival by frantically tapping on the thick steel hull with wrenches or whatever they could find.
They were signaling their location to the rescuers on the surface,
who were racing against time and rising water levels. Divers, shipyard workers. They spent days cutting through the battleship's triple-layered steel hull with torches and pneumatic saws,
knowing that the smallest mistake could flood the compartment
and drown the very men they were trying to save. In the end, they pulled 23 men alive from that inverted hull over the next 2 days, an incredible testament to the courage of both the trapped men and their rescuers.
And while the harbor was the main focus, this was a coordinated operation all across the island, wasn't it?
Oh, yes. The airfields across Oahu were equally critical targets. The Japanese strategy was precise. Eliminate the American air response before it could even get off the ground.
And they succeeded almost completely.
At fields like Hickam and Wheeler, American aircraft fighters, bombers, reconnaissance planes, they were all destroyed on the ground.
And here's that painful irony again. The planes were lined up wing to wing.
A deliberate counter-sabotage policy, designed to make them easier to guard against internal threats. Instead, that policy just. It created these rows of perfectly organized, easy targets for the Japanese dive bombers,
who just swept in with machine gun fire and fragmentation bombs.
Within the first 20 minutes, the majority of the U.S. air defenses were either destroyed or rendered totally unusable. And that lack of air cover allowed the Japanese second wave to operate with virtual impunity when they arrived an hour later.
But despite the chaos, the destruction, the complete lack of warning, moments of resistance did emerge almost immediately.
Yes, the shock very rapidly turned into a fighting instinct.
You hear about anti-aircraft guns, which were initially locked up or unmanned because it was a Sunday morning.
Security was low.
They were eventually brought into action by sailors and soldiers just acting instinctively. You have officers like Commander Logan C. Ramsey coining that famous phrase, "Air raid Pearl Harbor, this is no drill."
And sailors scrambling up the rigging of ships that hadn't been hit yet to manually load and fire guns.
And there were these incredible individual acts of courage. A few pilots.
Right. Second Lieutenants George S. Welch and Kenneth M. Taylor, they somehow managed to get their P-40 fighters airborne, despite the bombing of their base.
And they engaged the Japanese attackers in these desperate dogfights.
They did. They shot down several Japanese planes, providing the only real air resistance that morning. These acts were happening everywhere. Sailors and airmen reacting without orders, just doing whatever they could to fight back.
And the entire shocking event,
Right.
from the first bomb to the last plane of the second wave withdrawing, it lasted just under 2 hours.
Just under 2 hours. And when the Japanese aircraft finally departed, the sheer scale of their tactical victory was starkly apparent.
The American losses were catastrophic. More than 2,400 Americans were killed, including civilians. Over 1,000 more wounded.
Of the 8 battleships there, all were damaged. 4 were sunk, 3 were damaged beyond immediate repair.
And on the other side,
Japanese losses were minimal. 29 aircraft shot down. Fewer than 100 airmen and sailors lost, including those on the 5 midget submarines that were also destroyed. Tactically, the strike was a textbook. Devastating success.
a military masterpiece of surprise and destruction. But as we transition here, we have to look beyond that immediate devastation. We have to recognize how this tactical success was masking a profound strategic miscalculation.
A miscalculation that would ultimately cost Japan the war and actually accelerate the timeline for their defeat. And this is the central paradox we really have to dig into. While the attack was tactically devastating, its strategic impact was the exact opposite of what Admiral Yamamoto had hoped for.
The goal was to paralyze the American fleet. Buy time.
Exactly. Instead, it galvanized the American people, it galvanized American industry, and it failed to destroy the truly decisive instruments of future naval warfare.
Which brings us to the single most critical fact that shaped the entire Pacific War, everything that followed. And it's this: America's aircraft carriers were not at Pearl Harbor that morning.
This absence, it was pure, unadulterated luck for the United States.
Oh.
And it completely undermined Yamamoto's entire strategy.
These carrier ships, like the USS Enterprise, the Lexington, They were the core of the U.S. Pacific Fleet's mobility and striking power. They were the future.
Right?
So why were they out?
Well, the Enterprise was returning from delivering fighter planes to Wake Island, and Lexington was out delivering bombers to Midway Atoll. They were conducting routine, if important, missions far out at sea.
So had those carriers been sunk that morning, alongside the battleships?
The timeline for the United States to mount any kind of counteroffensive would have stretched by many months, maybe even a year or more, which would have given Japan exactly the breathing room Yamamoto craved.
But the missed targets weren't just the carriers, were they?
Not at all. And this is just as important. The physical assets left untouched on the island itself. The Japanese pilots focused almost exclusively on the ships and the aircraft. They largely ignored the facilities that would truly determine America's ability to wage a long war.
We're talking about infrastructure.
The boring stuff. The massive above-ground fuel depots, the repair facilities, the submarine bases.
That Japanese decision to prioritize sinking battleships over bombing these key industrial targets, that is what turned their tactical victory into a strategic error.
Let's just focus on the fuel for a second. The massive fuel depots held the entire reserve of fuel oil needed for the Pacific Fleet to operate. These huge oil tanks right on the shore were highly vulnerable.
They were sitting ducks.
Total sitting ducks. Had those depots been hit, the fire would have raged uncontrollably and the Pacific Fleet would have been paralyzed. Even if the carriers had survived, they wouldn't have been able to sortie from Hawaii for months. They'd have to operate from the U.S. mainland thousands of miles away.
So that sheer volume of fuel stored there, it represented not just a tactical advantage, but an entire strategic anchor.
And by ignoring it, the Japanese guaranteed that the U.S. Navy could immediately begin rebuilding and repositioning.
And the same goes for the repair facilities.
And the dry docks? Absolutely. The sources note that key repair docks like Dry Dock 1 were largely untouched. This allowed the U.S. Navy to recover far more quickly than Japanese planners ever expected.
So those battleships that were sunk.
Of the 8 damaged battleships, 4 were eventually put back into service during the war, thanks entirely to those spared repair facilities. This quick recovery greatly mitigated the long-term impact of the sunk vessels.
This strategic oversight, it really highlights that lingering issue in Japanese planning. They were too focused on the past.
Exactly. They were looking at battleships as these symbols of naval dominance, operating under a doctrine from 30 years prior. The objective was to destroy the visible symbols of American power, not the underlying industrial and logistical capability.
And Pearl Harbor itself violently proved just how wrong that old doctrine was.
It did. The immediate impact of the attack was this complete and radical shifting of naval doctrine in the Pacific. The battleships, these symbols of naval might, were revealed as vulnerable, slow, and frankly obsolete in the face of carrier-launched air power.
Precisely. The aircraft carriers, saved by pure chance, immediately and dramatically became the core of naval warfare. They provided mobility, range, striking power. Everything that was far beyond what a static battleship formation could offer.
So Japan's decision to prioritize the destruction of these static, vulnerable battleships over the fluid, crucial infrastructure was their ultimate strategic failure. They failed to kill the future of the American fleet. And the news of the attack, it spread across the United States with astonishing speed. Radios interrupted their regular Sunday programming, the voice of history just breaking into the afternoon calm.
Newspapers rushed out special editions with these screaming banner headlines. For millions of Americans who had hoped this conflict would just stay over there, the attack was a profound, immediate physical and psychological shock.
That initial shock was almost instantly replaced by this incandescent rage. And that anger rapidly turned into a steely, unified national resolve.
For a nation that had been so deeply divided over whether to enter the war, with powerful isolationist movements still arguing against it, Pearl Harbor erased that hesitation overnight.
It did.
It solidified public opinion in a way that years of political debate just couldn't. Isolationism died on December 7th.
On December 8, 1941, the day after the attack, President Franklin D. Roosevelt addressed a joint session of a stunned Congress. He delivered one of the most famous speeches in American history,
describing December 7th as a date which will live in infamy.
His address was short, it was firm, and it was masterful in its tone. He didn't speak of fear, he spoke of righteous indignation against a deliberate deception.
And the congressional response was immediate. It was nearly unanimous.
Congress declared war on Japan the very same day, with only one dissenting vote. But the ramifications didn't stop there. This was the moment the conflict truly became a world war in the fullest sense. It linked the fighting in Asia directly to the fighting in Europe.
Because while the U.S. declaration of war was aimed at Japan,
The war immediately went global because of that complex web of alliances. Within days, Japan's Axis allies, Germany and Italy, they honored their tripartite pact obligation and declared war on the United States.
so suddenly, America was officially and fully engaged in World War II, on both fronts, Pacific and European, fighting simultaneously on a scale we had never seen before.
And the most profound consequence, the one that truly changed the course of history, was the response of the American industrial engine.
The political pivot was matched by an industrial pivot that was just seismic.
And this is where we see the ultimate failure of Yamamoto's strategy. He banked on the American will to fight being weak. He fatally underestimated the American capacity to build and fight.
American industry, which had been supplying the Allies, immediately shifted into full wartime production.
The reluctant giant was awakened. And the scale of that mobilization is just staggering to look back on.
Factories that had been building cars started producing tanks. Washing machine plants started stamping out shell casings. Aircraft factories multiplied.
Consider this. In 1940, the U.S. produced about 6,000 aircraft. In 1944, at the peak of production, we were turning out nearly 100,000 planes a year.
It's unbelievable. The ability of the U.S. to produce thousands of Liberty ships, millions of tons of steel and aluminum, it just far outstripped the combined capacity of the Axis powers.
And millions of men and women joined the armed forces voluntarily and through the draft. The nation began fighting on a scale and intensity never before seen. We engaged in what historians call total war.
Which means the entire economy and society, from rationing at home to women entering the heavy industrial workforce, everything was geared toward the military objective.
And this industrial surge, which fundamentally tipped the scales against the resource-starved Japanese and Germans, was the decisive factor in the war.
And while Japan enjoyed that initial short-lived confidence from their tactical victory, and the celebrations in Tokyo were apparently muted by Yamamoto's own famous warning that they had only awakened a sleeping giant.
That industrial response meant their strategic plan had failed utterly. The American counterpunch was swift and surgically precise.
Within 6 months.
6 months of the attack, American and Allied forces effectively halted Japanese expansion at the Battle of Midway in June 1942.
And this was a battle fought largely between the aircraft carriers that had escaped Pearl Harbor.
The very ones. And it resulted in the sinking of 4 of Japan's best aircraft carriers. This decisively shifted the balance of power in the Pacific, permanently. Yamamoto's gamble to buy time resulted in the accelerated deployment and subsequent victory of the very forces he had hoped to neutralize.
And finally, we have to look at the lasting scars, the ones that stretched beyond the battlefield and deep into the fabric of American society itself.
The attack, born of desperation and executed with precision. It resulted in this intense, widespread fear and suspicion back home.
The sources grimly remind us that this fear, coupled with underlying racial prejudice, led to one of the darkest domestic consequences of the war.
The internment of more than 100,000 Japanese Americans. This policy was formalized under Executive Order 9066.
And most of these individuals, they were American citizens or legal residents. Yet they were forcibly removed from their homes on the West Coast and placed in these barbed wire concentration camps in remote, harsh inland areas.
Based purely on their ancestry.
They lost their homes, their businesses, their civil rights, all based on wartime hysteria.
And this is a profound and very somber analytical point. Pearl Harbor was a military event, but its fallout reminds us that war reshapes not only borders and armies, but also societies and our fundamental values.
The collective shock of that morning allowed discriminatory policies which stripped citizens of their rights and property to be implemented and accepted in the name of national security.
It stands as a chilling reminder of the societal cost of fear in times of total war. Hashtag outro.
So let's just recap the core elements we've synthesized from your sources today. The attack on Pearl Harbor. It was rooted in Japan's existential resource desperation.
Right, particularly that crippling U.S. oil embargo, which effectively forced their hand.
And it was executed with tremendous secrecy and these incredible innovative tactics, like those custom-modified torpedoes for the shallow harbor.
But, and this is the key, despite being a stunning tactical success, a real feat of military planning and execution, it was a profound strategic failure.
Because of the crucial absence of the American aircraft carriers.
And because they spared the essential logistical infrastructure like the fuel depots and repair facilities, that allowed the U.S. Navy to recover rapidly and shift its entire doctrine to carrier warfare.
The immediate consequence was the total mobilization of the United States. The industrial giant awakened. and that transformed the entire global conflict, bringing America onto both the Pacific and European fronts almost instantaneously.
And within 6 months, that industrial output and that new naval doctrine led directly to the decisive victory at Midway.
Today, Pearl Harbor remains one of the most solemn and powerful places of memory in the world. The wreck of the USS Arizona lies undisturbed beneath the water, preserved as a national memorial.
And visitors walk silently above it, looking down at that heavy history suspended just beneath the surface, aware of the massive cost of that day.
So what does this all mean for us now? The attack was a culmination of global tensions that were already exploding, but it fundamentally altered the pace and the scale of the war that followed.
It proved that no nation, no matter how geographically isolated, was immune to global conflict.
Pearl Harbor was not merely an attack on a military base.
No, it was the moment when distance disappeared, when neutrality definitively ended, and when the modern world fully entered an age of total war.
In less than 2 hours, the course of history changed, setting the stage for decades of geopolitical conflict and defining the shape of the American superpower we know today.
And from that moment forward, there would be no turning back.